and we'll go ahead and get started. Thanks for being
All
here,
right.
Andy.
All right, awesome. Thanks for that introduction, Stephanie. Thanks for to the Nomadic Network for doing this. I'm actually going to start off with an apology. I made the mistake of setting up outside. I'm in Texas. It got under 100 degrees for the first time in like 2.5 months. And so I thought I'll set up outside. That'll be nice. Now I'm hot, sweaty, confused why I have a beard. So forgive me. But want to thank Stephanie, the Nomadic Network, and of course, all of you for being here as well. I'm excited about this. I hope you are too. Now we're all here because we love travel. So I actually want to start things off with a question to see what type of travel the group here is interested in. So actually, let's take 30 seconds, maybe a minute, go into the chat. You've already introduced yourself and said where you're from. Go ahead. If I gave you, or if someone gave you, since I don't have $2,000 to give all of you for a trip, where would you travel? So let's take just 30 seconds, maybe a minute, think through that, and write down. All right, nice. Gil wants to go to the Amazon, me too. Spain, I haven't been. Jamaica, anywhere in the Caribbean. Iran, high on my list as well. Cool. All right, a ton of good places that I actually want to hear more about. I'm hoping at the end that maybe we can talk about some of these destinations that you all are interested in and how to get there in a way that's more sustainable. I'm going to use a few of my own examples to walk us through some of the strategies that we might use. One of the places I'm dreaming about is Madagascar. It just seems like such an awesome experience. I love wildlife. I love jungles. So I'd love to get over there. The animal on the right is a silky shafaka, which looks cool. And I think that's the coolest name for an animal out there. So some of these places that we really daydream about, we're lucky to be able to go. And I think have the responsibility to go there in a more thoughtful way that's more friendly to the climate. So that's what we'll focus on today. To tell you a little bit more about me, beyond just where I'm daydreaming for my next trip, I'm a travel addict, just worried about the climate crisis. Stephanie gave you that intro, a little bit more about me. I'm a professor at Minerva University. It's a really cool spot. Students from around the world travel around the world together through their 4 years. And so working with that college has really gotten me focused on sustainable travel a little bit more. I lead our sustainability programs there. And that inspired me to build Stay Verde, something that hopefully will help more travelers travel more sustainably, in particular, focusing on the climate crisis. So what we're going to go over today, the focus is going to be the second one, strategies to reduce the carbon footprint of your travel. But we'll start off talking about why we should consider the climate impact of our travels. I'm sure everyone here who signed up already has good reasons for this, but I think it's a good place to start still. Then the last few points we'll fly through at the end for as much time as we have. Important topics, talk about travel greenwashing a little bit so you can make better choices in how you're going about your sustainable travel, as well as where to give back to climate causes. And then wrap up how to be hopeful about the climate crisis. To me, it's really about bringing people together who want to do something about it. So I already am getting excited about that, having all of you here together to talk about this. So thanks for your time. So I realize a lot of us, especially those of us who sign up for a talk like this, know quite a bit about sustainable travel already. But as a professor, I know that knowledge doesn't work like a light switch we turn on. Like if you're like me, like my students, we forget the things we know. And so I hope today we'll have a chance just to reinforce one thing that we already know. Hope you're also going to pick up some new things, some new information about how to travel more climate friendly, and then also get inspired to take some more action. Too many times we don't do what we know. And so I hope through this talk today, we can also get more inspired to actually take that action on the things that we know. All right, so let's start off Why should we consider the climate impact of our travels? As an evolutionary biologist, I like to think of, I focus a lot of times on the impact on biodiversity, but as a traveler, this fact always really hits me. In 2017, there were 68 million climate refugees. It's a Brookings report. After the talk, I'm gonna send out the links to a lot of the information here. So if you're interested in that, I'll be providing that later. But this fact here really hits me as a traveler. Only 2% of people in the world travel for pleasure, but millions of people are being forced from their homes because of climate change. Now, that's not all because of global tourism, but global tourism plays its part. About 10% of greenhouse gas emissions are due to global tourism. I know there are a lot of people who will make the argument, well, it's governments, it's billionaires, it's businesses that make a difference, and so we shouldn't worry about our impact. I agree with the first part of that, but not the second. Just because Kylie Jenner flies her private jet everywhere doesn't mean I shouldn't worry about my own footprint. So appreciate that you all here are together to talk about how we can individually take some actions, but also I think it is important to consider that we need to, as a group of consumers, as a group of voters, try to have that impact as well. And so one of the biggest things we can do is changing our travel. Some people will make the argument that because of this impact of travel on the climate crisis, that we shouldn't travel at all, or at least we shouldn't fly at all. That's not where I am. Flig is real, but I'm not here to push that. That's not what I'm buying into, because there are a lot of positive aspects of travel. Tourism supports 10% of jobs globally. So not going to these destinations also is going to have a negative effect. So what I want to try to do, and what I want us together to try to work on, is how we can do that better with a smaller impact, so that we can have these benefits of travel globally as well as personally. So I know for all of us here, part of this organization, travel is one of the things that we love most. We can still have those things without so many of the negative effects, or fewer of the negative effects. And so that's why we'll spend most of our time here on this first part, strategies to reduce the carbon footprint of your travels. So I started with the question, if I gave you $2,000 for a trip, where would you travel next? I want to twist this question just a little bit. If I give you 2,000 kilograms of emissions, where would you travel next? Now, I'm not going to ask you to write something down, put an answer in here. This is just a little rhetorical here to try to get us thinking about how we can look at our carbon budget for our travel in the way we would look at our monetary budget for our travel. So, you know, I would love to go to Madagascar. One of the reasons that I haven't is that it's usually like over $2,000 for the flight itself. So considering some of those things influences our travel choices. And I hope today that we're all motivated a little bit more to consider the carbon budget of our travel, as well as have ways to be more economical about it, in the way that we're more economical about booking flights that are cheaper or something like that. And sometimes you can do both. So how to reduce your footprint by traveling more? My slightly clickbaity title to this. Most of it is about how to reduce your footprint, but there is an aspect about traveling more that can actually reduce your footprint. And two main things here, where you travel and how you get there. Now, these are not secrets, but what I hope to do here in this part of the presentation is reinforce this, as well as give a little context on what sort of improvement we can make. And so I'm just going to use a few examples. And as I said, hopefully at the end, we'll have a little bit of time where maybe we can look at some of your examples of places you want to go and see how you might make those improvements. So I want to start off with this fact from an academic paper that did some analysis of travelers from Sweden, and they found theoretically emissions could be reduced by 67% just by changing mode of transportation and changing destination. And for the change in destination, they said, all right, if you want a beach holiday and you're planning to go to Thailand, what's an alternative that might be closer that's still a beach holiday? In fact, there's some other research that indicates travelers who go to a random location rather than like the big destinations, they still have just as good of an experience, suggesting that there's empirical support for getting a good travel experience, even if like I don't end up in Madagascar where I have my heart set. You know, maybe that's where I end up going still, and can do that in a better way. But changing destination is one big possibility here to make some reductions. And there's good opportunity just in these small choices. So I want to start talking about changing how you get there. So things we already know, that buses and trains have fewer emissions than cars or planes. Fewer layovers have less emissions than more layovers. These are things we know. I want to get into a couple details here with just some hypothetical trips. So talk about going to the Netherlands. I'm based in Austin, so I've been imagining myself traveling because I like to daydream about travel as I was putting this together. And what I want to suggest is one strategy is to make it your default to search flexible dates for direct flights. So direct flights sometimes even are cheaper, often they're more, but if you have strict dates set, then oftentimes you're going to miss those because they're only particular days a week. Traveled to Asheville earlier this summer, which was great. The only direct flights are on Monday and Friday. Maybe you don't have that flexibility in your schedule, but if you do, that's a key way to start. So I imagine going to the Netherlands, and we see here that it's actually a little bit more expensive, but you save a substantial amount of carbon emissions for this nonstop flight. Save some time as well. And to put this in context, the savings from, in this case, paying that $50 or $60 extra is about as much as eating a plant-based diet for a year. One of the other main things that individuals can do to reduce their carbon footprint. So to me, this is more motivation to say, hey, maybe I should go ahead and change my travel budget a little bit and book that direct flight. Now, we also see here that direct flight is on a Saturday instead of a Sunday. So that flexibility, putting that into the search, surfaced a direct flight that I wouldn't have had otherwise. But I think we can get even more creative about how we get to a destination to reduce our carbon footprint. So I want to talk about Kenya. As Stephanie said, this is actually where I met my wife. So it's a destination close to my heart. I want to get back there. I haven't been able to, but I want to use this as an example here. How much CO2 can be reduced by changing how you get to that destination? And so what I'm going to compare here is the cheapest flight from Austin to Nairobi versus taking a bus to a gateway to take then the cheapest flight to Nairobi. This is something I've actually never done before as a traveler. And now, after going through putting this presentation together, this is something I'm going to look into some more. Now, whether it's on the departing side or the arrival side, I think there's good opportunity in here. Maybe you already live by a gateway. Maybe you're flying out of New York, but maybe that means you fly into another gateway, like going into Amsterdam and then taking a train to Berlin, if that's your destination. So comparing these, see, it's actually quite a bit cheaper to go with the bus trip. So it's about $60 for the bus trip, round trip. So you can save about $200 doing this, as well as save quite a bit of time. Instead of 30+ hours for your travel time, you end up with just over 20 hours each way on your travel time. And the carbon emission savings are substantial as well. So again, this is more than the savings from changing to a plant-based diet for a year. So that bus, maybe in some instances, would be not as convenient. In this case, you're saving time. And also, I'm going to argue that it's more convenient than other actions we might take. I mean, certainly plenty of other reasons to choose a plant-based diet. But if you're doing so for carbon emissions, this is, I would say, a more efficient way to do so. So on this point, two main things to change how you get there. Use flexible search to find direct flights and prioritize that direct flight. Obviously, we're part of a budget travel community. We're not going to spend an extra $200 when it's the case. But maybe if it's 20 or if it's 50, get a little bit more motivation to do so, seeing what the impact is here. And being flexible in your travel can give you some opportunities. Maybe you get a little, instead of flying direct to Berlin, you spend some time in Amsterdam, or maybe instead of flying out of Austin, you spend some time in Dallas. So can view that as more opportunity for better travel, as well as a substantially lower footprint. So changing where you travel. I think this is maybe, in my mind, the most contentious one. Like, I get my heart set on a destination, I don't want to go somewhere else. So I'm curious, could you all put in the chat, have you changed where you travel because of either the carbon footprint or because of the price? And if so, I'm curious where you changed. Erica says price, yes, I've definitely done it for price. Changed length of stay, Jill says, if you're looking at the chat. We're actually going to talk about that next. Ketty, I like that, just picking destinations by direct flight availability. All right, so some people yes, some people no. I think there's a lot of opportunity in this. And this is obvious, I don't need to tell you this. Closer is better in terms of the emissions. The challenge here, I think, is trying to find places that are going to give you that travel experience. So trying to find, what do you want out of that trip? If I'm going to Madagascar, is it really about the silky shafaka that I want to see? Or do I want to go see some wildlife, see some primates? Where can I do that? And so I want to use this as a case study, look at going to Madagascar and how I might make some different choices to reduce the carbon footprint of my flight. So we can look at Austin to Antananarivo versus Costa Rica. A lot of great primates and jungles there. Same thing with Brazil. Gail, you said you're looking at the Amazon as one of your dream places. So we look at these flights, and again, it's cheaper to go to these locations that are closer, that have a smaller footprint, substantially so. And when we look at the travel time as well, and of course the carbon footprint of these different locations, substantial difference. So, you know, going to the Amazon, an amazing place, you're going to save over 1,000, almost 1,500 kilograms of carbon emissions. And so the CO2e figure includes not just carbon dioxide, but also some other greenhouse gases like methane, nitrous oxide. So change where you travel, look for similar experiences in closer places, talk to other travelers about their favorites. And so here I think is a spot where we can talk as a community. I go to these Nomadic network events. I lead the ones in Austin, and I have a blast just talking about, like, where have you been? Where should I go? I'm convinced from the last one that I need to spend some time in Istanbul. And so I think this is an opportunity, again, is the way we bring budget into our conversation about where a cheaper place might be. We can talk about, all right, where's a place where I can have a smaller footprint, but also have a great experience. And so, you know, Gail, the Amazon is awesome. If you want to talk about Costa Rica jungles and where you can see some great wildlife there, as well as some great beaches. I'd be happy to talk about that. And so this is a place where I think having this network and making it more of a habit to talk about the footprint of our travels can help us out in collectively reducing our footprint. So these are pretty well-known things of how to reduce your footprint. Hopefully by looking at these examples, get a little bit better understanding of how much of a difference we can make, and it's substantial, as well as the fact that sometimes we can actually save money that way. We can save time that way. I think there's a prevailing notion out there that doing something that's more sustainable is inevitably going to be more costly, is inevitably going to be more difficult. That's not always the case. With these examples, we see that we can actually save money by making some of these changes. And so to get to this issue of traveling more, I want to make the point that how long you stay can actually be one of the biggest ways you can reduce your carbon footprint. Now, this of course depends on having that flexibility to go for a longer time, but staying longer can really have a substantial impact and make a big improvement on your carbon footprint. And this is because your carbon footprint at the destination is often going to be less than your carbon footprint at home. Now, I'm making the assumption that most people are in the US. That might not be the case. Actually, could you drop into the chat and let me know if you're somewhere else? So the sad fact of the matter is that the travelers based in the US have a substantially higher footprint at home. Canada, I'm sad to say, is actually larger than the US on average. Scotland, South Africa, those are less. Dominican Republic, those are less. And so some of these points here are predicated on the assumption that you're in a place that has substantial everyday living, has a large carbon footprint. Martha, yeah, sorry, I see the I see the facepalm emoji. I mean, I feel like that being in the US too, so you're not alone. And so I just want to show how much of an impact can be had by staying longer in a destination. And also this brings in destination choice as well. So the average American emits 14,900 kilograms of carbon per year. Compare that to those in the Netherlands, 4,500. I think Scotland is in that range too. So that's substantially less. Compare that to the average Kenyan, 400 kilograms of emissions, much less. And actually, I think this points towards some of the disparities that this should be higher just because of the issues with global poverty. Costa Rica emits 1,600 kilograms of carbon emissions for the average person. So we can start looking at these different destinations, look at what the flight impact is, and how can we get some savings by staying longer. Now, this has another assumption that as a traveler, we are essentially living as people in that nation do, which may not be the case in some places. And often as a traveler, you're going to have a bigger impact than people who, say, live in the Netherlands and they just stay in Amsterdam all the time and maybe don't travel around the country as much. But we'll still make the assumption that we can get some savings here. So my carbon footprint for the year, if I take a weekend trip to the Netherlands and go back to the US, assuming I'm an average American, I know a lot of people here eat a plant-based diet, maybe ride their bikes, different things like that, but we'll work with some of these averages. It ends up being so much higher than if we go to the Netherlands for a year and live like an average person in the Netherlands. So this led me to the question, how many days until the carbon footprint of being in a destination, the savings of that balances out your emissions from the flight. And so we see, if you go to Costa Rica with a much smaller flight footprint, you can get a lot of savings. And actually, by the time that you've spent about 2-3 weeks in Costa Rica, that savings from being in the destination and having a smaller footprint can counteract that flight footprint. So we can change how long we stay if we're lucky enough to have some of that flexibility. So this is another thing I think we can bring into the discussion when we're choosing a destination. The World Bank has a cool resource where you can look through and see what the average emissions are of your destination. I'll give you that resource at the end if you'd like. And then decide to stay longer, especially when you travel longer distances. So if I ever do make it to Madagascar, I'll make sure it's a time when I can stay longer to hopefully counteract the big footprint of that flight. So some simple things: change where you travel, change how you get there, change how long you stay. And so hopefully these are some easy guidelines. If you want to get into the nuts and bolts of like plugging things into a carbon calculator and those various things, email me. I'm happy to talk more. I love running spreadsheets. But if you just want some simple rules of thumb to go by, these are a few that are going to help you make a substantial improvement on the carbon footprint of your travel. Okay, so those are some of the strategies to reduce the carbon footprint of your travel. I didn't get into any things you might do in the destination. There are possibilities there in terms of what your eating choices are, where you stay in terms of booking a place with AC or not with AC. Since I'm outside in Texas now, I'm feeling like I want to go with AC. That's just to say there's a lot more to get into here, but I want to hit some of these main points since we have a short time. And I do want to take a little bit of time talking about some of these other topics as well and how to avoid travel greenwashing. So greenwashing, when companies, destinations make these claims of doing something good for the environment, but really it's just a facade and they're operating in the same way, not making the improvements that they claim to. Now, I try to be a trusting person, but this is one area where my take is we should all assume a company is greenwashing until proven innocent. It's just so rampant out there, not just within the travel industry, but in other places, that I feel like consumers have to start from that standpoint. And how are companies going to prove that they're not greenwashing? Just a few simple rules of thumb here as well. Want to look for claims that are specific. You'll often see vague language about like, oh, we need to save the world and we're making these commitments. Look for claims that are specific, verifiable, and focus on what already has been done. And so I just want to run through a few examples here of what I see as what we should be looking for when we're evaluating whether a company is greenwashing or not. So Ecosia, this isn't a travel company, but if you're looking for travel information, you can go there. What they do is they use their profits from running a search engine and plant trees. And so this is pretty specific, pretty clear. They're talking about what they've already done. And in fact, if you follow their social media, you can see some of the tree planting programs that they have. I'm actually not the biggest fan of tree planting programs. I'll follow up on that a little bit later on where we can donate our money to climate causes. But in terms of greenwashing, I think Ecosia is doing a good job here of being clear, specific, talking about what they have done, and in other areas showing that. Now, Booking.com. Here, if we look on the left, they're operating sustainably and fostering a culture of sustainability. They're setting ambitious new targets to reduce carbon emissions. If you click on learn more, you get more of that sort of language. This, unfortunately, is the type of thing I often see, that I often run into for various different companies, that is getting towards greenwashing. One thing that booking.com does do, which I like and is more specific in delivering on something, for their travel sustainable, if you're looking at hotels, they'll actually mark travel sustainable properties. And then you can look at some of the things that those hotels are doing. Some of these are kind of greenwashy type of things, like option to reuse towels. If you look at that under the water heading, that's actually the genesis of the term greenwashing, was from hotels doing this. But a few other things that actually I like to see: 100% renewable energy used at this location, no single-use plastic. So some good things, and nice to be able to check ahead of time. I'm sure all of you have had the experience of getting to a hotel and you see like those little bottles and everything wrapped in plastic, and you're like, so this here has some specificity and some usefulness. So in one aspect, I see booking.com doing some greenwashing, but in another aspect here, I see doing some better stuff. And one of my very favorites, this is not actually a travel company, but it's an app where you can track your carbon footprint. So, you can get at some of the things that you're doing for your travels, Joro. So they're making a clear statement of what they've done on the front page of their website. We lowered our emissions by 21%. When you click on how it works, they say, view our live carbon ledger. I told you I love spreadsheets. I don't know if other people get excited about this like I do, but the fact that you can go and see exactly how much they've offset, have this verification ID that you can follow up on, and you can access this pretty easily in, I think this was 3 clicks, really. These are the standards we need to be holding companies to actually deliver on claims of being more sustainable. So hopefully by seeing some of these, we all get better at taking our business to those places that do a good job of this, and not taking our business to those places that are just greenwashing, which unfortunately the latter is more common than the former. So my main takeaway on this, my recommendation, is to assume a company is greenwashing until proven innocent. And as you're looking at the material, within a few clicks, you should be able to see claims that are specific, verifiable, and show what's already been done. Even if it's just a little, show what's already been done. Okay, so start wrapping things up, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Where we should give back to climate causes. Our first aim should be reducing our emissions, but what we can't reduce, we should be doing something to counteract. That's the net zero mindset. My take is that we should prioritize giving to causes focused on political action and decarbonization of our economies. Those are the areas that are going to have the biggest impact. This graph here claims that a $1,000 donation has a substantially higher impact than avoiding that one transatlantic flight. I got to be honest, the scientist in me kind of wants to call bullshit on this, and I did not have the opportunity to look in more detail about whether I believe in this. But what is true is that our donations can have a big impact. Whether it's this big of an impact, I don't know, but we should be thoughtful and generous in giving. If we're part of the 2% of the world population that's lucky enough to travel, privileged enough to travel, I'd argue that we should also be giving some to these charities. So I know planting trees is a big thing that companies will talk about. Part of me wants to say that that's like, I was about to put that down as one of the signs of greenwashing. Not quite, because planting trees can be good, but it's not great. So obviously trees take in carbon dioxide, they store carbon, but some of the land use issues really undercut this being a primary strategy. This quote really nails me. For trees to remove the emissions of just Americans, we need to dedicate half of the world's land mass. So this should be part of the answer and is a good place to send some charitable dollars, but not the best. Conserving forests is better, but not great. So carbon offsets, there are different ways, different programs for carbon offsets, like planting trees, like conserving forests, sometimes methane cook stoves. Unfortunately, some of these don't deliver on the claims, even the gold standard ones. This article in ProPublica, really recommend you check out. I can send that out as a link as well. Shows how tracking down some of these programs that they didn't deliver over time. Sometimes 90% of the forest that was allegedly conserved had actually been cut down. So this can be better. Where it's best is when it's done at the governmental level. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with Gabon, but I think it's a couple decades ago now, they set aside huge tracts of land. So this can be a really effective strategy, but one with some pitfalls in where we might send our charitable dollars. Political action, not necessarily a sure bet, but this is an area that can have some big impacts. On the left, we see deforestation in Brazil. And so obviously the political situation there has an impact on whether there's forest conservation that impacts our climate. On the right, I laugh at myself because I put this on social media. I'm like, how clueless am I that I'm trying to make legislation go viral? But still, I'm excited about this, and I think this is cool. Part of the Inflation Reduction Act that was just passed actually sets aside $250 million for sustainable air fuel. So it's just tougher to make air travel more sustainable the way that road travel has been. I mean, for the simple fact that you have to put that big plane in the air, and that requires a lot more energy. So sustainable air fuel is one of the best possibilities to make travel itself less carbon intensive. And so it's cool that this political action is going to help travelers down the road. So giving to political causes is a really useful approach. And decarbonization tech. Clean Air Task Force is one of my favorite organizations. Others have named them the most effective climate organization because they do a range of things, including some tech advancement like carbon capture technology. They do some political advocacy. So this is one of my favorites. And I also think we should be helping out those who are impacted by climate change, disproportionately the global poor, and there are organizations out there. Environmental Justice Foundation has been around for a long time. Climate Refugees, a little newer, but both doing good things for those millions and millions of people who are going to be impacted by the climate crisis. So I think we have a responsibility as travelers to prioritize giving to some of these causes. And I think it's a little unintuitive, or at least what I see out there points towards some of these less effective ones like tree planting campaigns and not towards some of the more effective ones. All right, so where to give back on to climate causes, a ton of good places. I could have made that section a whole lot longer, but just wanted to highlight a few. I want to wrap up before we get to questions on talking about how to be hopeful about the climate crisis. And I want to end with this topic because ecological grief is real. I see it in my students. I have it myself, but there is good reason to be hopeful. And I think the biggest thing is to focus on small progress. And sometimes it's big progress. I've been invigorated by the Inflation Reduction Act and the fact that the US government is taking action for, honestly, about the first time. And then also working collaboratively. So I want to wrap up thanking all of you for coming to this talk. I hope it was useful for you to reinforce some things that you already knew, pick up some new information, and hopefully get some motivation to take some action. And I'd like to follow up on that. I'm going to send around a link if you want to sign up. One thing that I like to do with my colleagues at Minerva is we just have a small reading group. We go through short articles, we chat, and we learn a lot that way from each other, from those articles. And I'd like to set that up with some other travelers. So if you're interested, maybe you could join. We could talk about some of these articles about sustainable travel. I think that'd be fantastic. If you want to get some of the information to links of, the carbon calculator, the spreadsheet that I use, the facts, happy to send those out as well. So I'm going to send just a Google form link. I'll put that in the chat that you all can mark if you'd like to get that information, or if not, that's all good too. But to me, this collaborative working is really the key way to stay hopeful about the climate crisis, as well as get successful about it. Working individually, it really is just a drop in a bucket that doesn't do too much, but coming together will have more influence on travel's footprint, on the political process, on a lot of things. And so I think there's good reason to be hopeful now moving forward that things will get better. And I want to thank all of you for signing up, taking some time to do that. So thanks. And let's take the last little bit of time for some questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andy. That was a very insightful presentation. I learned a lot, and it sounded like everybody is very interested in that too. So yeah, please drop that Google form link in the chat. People are interested in that, and we'll make sure to send that out in the email, follow-up email as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we did get a few questions here from both Laura and Susan. They asked, how can we calculate the CO2 emissions when searching for flight itineraries? And I think you...
Good question. Before I drop the Google form into the chat, let me get that link in the chat. And because there actually is an important detail on calculating your carbon footprint. So I use the ICAO webpage. It probably has the worst user interface. It's really pretty horrible, but I favor this one. It's associated with the UN. It's really good. They take into account like average flight, like, is it half full in this region of the world? Is it 85% full in this region of the world? So they've incorporated a lot of those details. And so this is a spot that I'll go to, and what I used for this presentation to calculate that carbon footprint. I'll just go back and forth between kayak and this, or whatever you might be using to book that flight. An important detail is that this gives you the CO2 footprint, the carbon dioxide footprint. You also need to account for methane, nitrous oxide. It's actually debated in the scientific literature whether we should be doubling the CO2 or tripling the CO2. Choose whether you want to be more conservative or less conservative, but I favor this tool and want to add that detail. Remember that number that it spits out, we should be doubling that or tripling that. And so if you're deciding to go to purchase carbon offsets for your trip, make sure you're adding in those non-CO2 effects as well. Okay, Ketty says, could you repeat that about doubling CO2? So the reason we should double or triple is because airplanes are emitting not just carbon dioxide, but also other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxide. And so that doubling or tripling accounts for that.
Sorry, I'm just going to unmute myself for a second. But based on figures that you're getting from where, I guess, is what I meant.
This, oh, sorry, this ICAO, if you use that tool. So someone asked where.
It's just doing CO2, it's not doing greenhouse gases in general. Okay.
Correct. Yep. But it accounts for a lot of other details that make me favor this tool over some other ones you'll find on the net.
Great. Thank you, Ketty.
Yeah.
And next question from Piyush. For cost benefit analysis, what is the price of CO2 you would use? And then said it was $40 per ton earlier. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in that range, and that's debated. Different countries have different levels. Germany, I think, is in the 40 range. California as a state has priced carbon. I'm a big fan of so that John Doerr quote about how many trees, how much land it would take for trees to offset Americans' emissions. He has a great book called Speed and Scale. In there, he advocates for $55. So you're in the right range. It's debated. Different countries have set different things. Personally, I like that $55 figure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, good question.
And last one that I saw in the chat from Ali. Are there any search tools that incorporate land options? For instance, I can select bus plus a paid ride in Google Maps. And is there an equivalent for flights that you know of?
Yeah, good question. I don't actually. It should be out there. I feel like I've occasionally gotten that returned to me, but maybe I'm just thinking of that Google Maps. If someone knows of this, drop it in the chat. I will look for it afterwards.
Okay, so
Omeo?
Teddy actually says Omeo.
All right, there we go.
Okay, great.
Cool.
And then Ketty actually has a question about tree planting. If you want to unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah, so I write about sustainability and travel, and I write about lots of companies that that make lots of these sustainability claims. So a lot of them, like you said, are based on tree planting. And one of the things that I have come across trying to research whether or not their tree planting claims actually mean anything or not is you should look for programs where people are planting trees locally. So not saying we're planting in Madagascar or something like that. They're planting locally. They're like generally don't want a third party involved. I'm just curious to see what you think about like this set of things to look for that I've read. So planting locally, not having it done by a third party, and they're keeping track of the tree death rate, and they're controlling for the fact that they're not being planted this year and then cut down for paper in 3 years.
Yeah,
that's what I've heard as like that's what you should look for and what you should ask. I was just wondering if you agree with that list.
I do agree with that list, and another reason why I feel like going via government organizations is the better approach for forest conservation as well as tree planting. So you can plant trees through, I forget the name of the organization, but it essentially partners with U.S. Forestry Service. And so that is in a context in which there's going to be better management of those forests. I mean, there is, harvesting of some U.S. forests, so that is partially an issue. But then you have the Forestry Service that's going out there doing better monitoring of that tree death rate, because it's easy, and you'll find this. People will scatter seeds, call it a tree, and certainly that seed does not
ever going back to see if it turned into a tree.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that list is great, and I wouldn't add to anything to it, but rather say if you want to have an impact with the money that you give, try to go to one of those organizations that essentially is working with a governmental body, because they have the systems set up to do those things on the list.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Ketty. And Andy, that's all the information that we have, or all the questions that I saw in the chat there.
Okay.
I'll go ahead and put Andy's information again if you want to connect with him, and I'm sure he's happy if you reach out.
Yeah, and let me go ahead and put in just a short Google form. If you want to sign up for that article discussion, that would be awesome. I'd love to continue the discussion there. If you want some of the information from this presentation, some of those facts and figures, links to tools, go ahead and let me know there, and I'll just follow up with some emails on that. But want to thank everyone for coming. Appreciate you taking some time on this, and hope to hear from you later.
Great. And then Piyush just put in a great tip in there. If you want to save all these links, In Zoom, you can click